Hello, and thank you for joining us. I'm Daniela Fayer, publisher of Government Executive Media Group. It's my pleasure to welcome our viewers today to this viewcast entitled Empowering Federal IT with Intelligent Infrastructure. Events like this wouldn't be possible without the support of our underwriter, so I'd like to take a moment to recognize the exclusive underwriter of today's viewcast, Accenture Federal Services. I'd also like to thank the research partner for today's event, the Government Business Council. They're the research arm of Government Executive Media Group. For more information about today's subject, you can review their recent report, Is Federal IT Up to Speed?, by clicking on the link provided on our webpage. Before we kick off today's program, I have a few brief announcements for the audience. Feel free, and please do, submit questions at any time during the program by tweeting at us using hashtag FederalIT. At the end of the discussion, our panelists will have time to answer some of your questions. And tomorrow, we'll be sending an email with a link to the recording of today's viewcast. Please forward the link to anyone you know who was unable to attend or anyone you think might have an interest in viewing. It's now my pleasure to introduce the speakers, our panelists today, and our moderator. With us, we have Greg Capella. Greg is the Acting Executive Director of the Enterprise Systems Development Office within the Office of the Chief Information Officer, Department of Homeland Security. He came to DHS from commercial consulting, where he was the Chief Operating Officer of a small IT consulting firm. Prior to that, Greg managed the development and support of financial services software. Also, Jim Menard is a Managing Director within Accenture Federal Services with primary focus on leading the AFS IT optimization technology practice. In his horizontal role, Jim works across the three AFS portfolios in leading cloud services, infrastructure modernization, application optimization, and business analytics solutions areas. And Larry Socker, is the Global Managing Director for Infrastructure Services Growth and Strategy. He brings over 25 years of experience in network and infrastructure. He's responsible for defining, evolving, and driving global offerings, alliance partnerships, assets, and campaigns to support the growth of Accenture's infrastructure services businesses. And finally, our moderator for today, Adelaide O'Brien, IDC Research Director. Adelaide is responsible for developing and publishing research for transforming government IT. Her research provides early views into the emerging technologies of big data and analytics and cloud. I can't think of a better person to lead this distinguished panel in our viewcast discussion today. Adelaide?
Thank you so much, Daniela, and welcome panelists. You know, before we get started and do a deeper dive into your experiences, I've been asked to talk a little bit about what IDC calls our third platform. Now, this platform is a platform that enables citizen interaction. It really helps utilize resources better. And we're seeing this platform used by government to really help them reimagine how work is done in serving citizens. This platform is made up of 4 technologies: cloud, and that's infrastructure, platform, and software as a service, which enable, agility and scalability. It's made up of big data and analytics. And there we're seeing government entities use that to just really take a look at and analyze the very fast-moving data, both structured and unstructured. And the use is then to make much better informed decisions at the strategic, operational, and tactical level. Mobile broadband is another technology in the third platform, and that enables anywhere, anytime communication with citizens and with employees. And then the fourth element of this is the social networking. And we see that allowing crowdsourcing, as well as an ability for citizens to talk to government and to talk to other folks. But let me first set the groundwork for the third platform. IDC said the first platform was basically built on the mainframe. And as we think back to those days, we know that enabled thousands of apps and millions of users worldwide. And then the second platform took hold in about the 1980s. It took about 10 years for this to become ubiquitous, and this was built upon the PCs and client-server models. And as we think about this, we know that this platform is enabling tens of thousands of applications and hundreds of millions of users worldwide. And this platform, primarily it's a business platform. When you think about it, it enables business content, business processes, and business collateral. But now what we see is that we're in the midst of a massive structural shift, and that's going from this second platform of PCs and client servers to the one of technology growth and innovation, again, fueled by these four technologies: cloud, big data analytics, mobile broadband, and social networking. So it's important. We know that not only is it important to think about these today, but as we start to predict the future growth, we believe that these technologies are really going to be fueling the growth over the next 20 years in IT. And we also think that these are the technologies that any new strategic IT initiative is going to be leveraging these technologies. One of our forecasts is that by 2020, when the IT industry reaches $5 trillion, 1.7 trillion of that is going to be what is larger than today, and that's going to be driven by these technologies. So let's just take a minute and think about what's really driving this growth. The growth in new IT investment is really driven by the explosion of digital information in this third platform. And we see that from trillions of devices, and that's from smartphones and embedded sensors, and think about the Internet of Things where everything is connected. But that's also, we see that driven by new engagement models, not just technology. And we see government moving from communicating and informing citizens to actually two-way communications. And now there's even collaboration with other agencies, inter-collaboration, and federal, state, and local, not only to inform citizens, but to get feedback from them and to provide them the services as they're needed, when they're needed. Now, in the short term, we see a lot of agencies using third platform technologies to really help them with their operational efficiencies. And think about cloud for this. Initially, it's really going to help move from a CapEx, to an OpEx operating model. But in the longer term, agencies are telling us that these technologies are really helping them to redesign their services and provide new services much more efficiently, and actually start to delight the citizens who count on them. Now, I want to talk a little bit, too, because the third platform, it is about technology, but it's also about a different focus of government IT executives and CIOs. And we see government IT executives shifting their focus from one of siloed servers and storage and information to really start to focus on processes and automation, converged infrastructures, virtualized infrastructures, collaboration within their agencies and with other agencies, and using cloud-based technologies. We also have seen a shift from IT agility, which is really good, and it's a good thing to have that. It'll help ensure that the deployments are on time and do what is intended. But we're seeing that shift to business agility. So we're seeing IT executives really use these technologies to help the line of business really focus and get their business done faster. And last, we're seeing a focus from information, and we know government is a major source of information, but we're seeing it from just managing information to really managing innovation and using these technologies to get there. So one of the things that we see is a real shift then in how the CIOs and how the IT organizations are leading. And we advise our government clients to spend time with those line of business executives and those mission executives and understand what their needs are and provide them the technology that they need, to ensure that their projects are complete, to delight their citizens, help the CFO focus on outcomes as they shift their focus from assets to really agency outcomes. So it's really a shift then in thinking and using these technologies to really enable the organization. Now, that's where we see government going, and the research that Accenture commissioned with the Government Business Council illustrates that many agencies have a lot of challenges today. So I'm going to just highlight some of them that I think are some of the most important statistics from that study. 63% of the respondents to the survey agreed that the current speed of their IT services hinders their agency's ability to achieve its mission. So this is not business agility, it's not even IT agility. And that 63% of the survey respondents felt that way. 2/3 of the respondents suggest that automating at least one IT capability would improve their agency's ability to achieve mission. And so think of that. And you know, the survey went on to have the respondents select these capabilities. And these are things like configuration of devices and desktops, detection and resolution of infrastructure problems, prediction of capacity needs, and even infrastructure provisioning. So automating those would actually help agencies improve their mission. Over half, 52% of the respondents don't think that their agency's IT infrastructure provides them with the IT services they need to do their jobs effectively. Now that's really a startling statistic when you think of the nearly $80 billion that the federal government spends on IT, with over half of them thinking that it's not helping, the infrastructure is not helping them with their mission. And finally, 44% indicate that achieving more efficient operations is the most significant driver of IT modernization for their agency. So the question becomes then, given these statistics and the results of the survey, you know, how do we get from where many government agencies say they are today to really get engaged in this third platform and start to leverage some of these newer transforming technologies to really provide business agility and focused on outcomes? You know, and we know that nobody gets there in one step. It may be interesting to understand and discuss some of these first steps, and I'm going to count on you as panelists to help us do that. And so let's get started and share your experience, Greg, from an agency perspective. And Larry, we'll ask you to share it from commercial best practices. And you know, so many government executives want to learn what is the commercial sector doing. Yep. And they know that there's just really some amazing things going on there where they're delighting their customers and really having much more efficient businesses. And then, Jim, we're going to ask you to talk about also best practices at the federal level. And we know that many agencies are leveraging those commercial best practices. And so we'll have you address that as well. But I think we're going to start with you, Greg. And I'm going to go back to the Government Business Council study. And the statistic of 63 respondents agree that the current speed of their IT services hinders their agency's ability to achieve mission. And then again, the other statistic that more than 2/3 stated that automation is a critical component to enable this increased efficiency. So if you could just talk a few minutes about automation and why that's so critical for efficiency in federal agencies.
Absolutely, and I think the respondents' information does seem understandable to me, and I think as a consumer, I myself kind of resonate with those messages. Underlying it all, though, is a different message I think I'd like to sort of focus on, and that is IT is a mission enabler, and as such, we can always do more. There's always more we can do to help make that happen. To that point, part of what we're doing at DHS is actually actively embracing the cloud. We have a major program from Citizenship and Immigration Services that's actually about to launch another major effort in the cloud. My organization itself, within the CIO, is actually help facilitating that process. And we are now doing a business evaluation on whether it makes more sense to use a cloud-based solution or grow it internally. Clearly, based on security and mission requirements, you may choose to keep it in-house. But we used to always just think in-house. We don't anymore. And as we do things like DevOps and agile development, we're seeing that we're able to roll out things much quicker and partnering with industry to actually better embrace some of these newer technologies, some of the cloud computing and other technologies out there. We think we can provide more services quicker to community.
Wow, that sounds very, very engaging. So I'm going to turn now to you, Larry, and maybe you can piggyback on this and remember some of the statistics from the study as well. And you know, do you see similar issues to what Accenture found in the federal?
Absolutely. Irrespective of industry, just about all of our clients are on this journey to what we refer as the digital business. And this is either to disrupt, capture new markets, or often just to avoid being disrupted by the next Uber. So as you described that digital journey, we clearly see that as a priority for industry-wide. You start to couple that with cloud, mobility, big data, and what we're finding is their infrastructure is getting stretched beyond beyond its capacity, in many cases to its breaking point. So we've been working on what we call this much more intelligent infrastructure, and very simply, it's meant to increase agility, reduce cost, and get to better service levels, so improve their operations. So spending a lot of time on getting environments that we can now start to self-provision. You mentioned the DevOps, which is a great example. You want to obviously continually monitor this and make sure that it's performing to where it needs to be. Getting increasingly levels of sophistication. So how do we analyze and optimize, and even self-learning over time? So we're seeing a lot of this. Retail in particular, seeing a lot of innovation there. So everything from how they are starting to do industrialized managed Wi-Fi to now launch mobile point of sales devices, video kiosks so they can interact with their customers, surveillance cameras, and starting to leverage that. All of a sudden, the wireless infrastructure becomes business critical, which is something they hadn't had to worry about previously. And they now need mobile device management as they get a proliferation of all these sensors and devices that they need to manage in that environment. Cloud bursting is very important for them. Obviously Black Friday, the seasonalities they have there, and I suspect in the government, the IRS tax season is probably some very similar equivalent. Close to my heart as a network guy, we're starting to see network virtualization and software-defined networks come into play. So, the retail one's actually pretty interesting. If we have a client who wants to provision a new application like a video kiosk so they can interact with their customers, in the past, it would take a very long time to provision the associated virtual LANs in a secure way to support PCI compliance, all the associated resources. So it was always a showstopper. We're actually seeing outside of the data center and cloud bursting an interesting use case on how they use virtualization. We think over time voice recognition and text-to-speech will become more important. So next time you go to an Abercrombie store and that guy's got that little headset on, he may be able to do a quick inventory lookup and saying, hey, do you have it in a closed store if it's not in stock? Critical to a lot of whether it's intelligent infrastructure, we see software at the heart of it, and I think that's what's fundamentally allowing us to get to the automation that Greg was talking about. So the whole notion of software unlocking the potential of all this hardware. And we're seeing a big trend. We obviously virtualized the compute environment for quite some time. We're now seeing this push of how do we get it into, expand that to storage and network, and get the same level of pooling and abstraction, so we can get the efficiencies into the environment, and increasingly over time, even starting to expose those programming interfaces so that applications and developers can start to take advantage of that. And I think what we're finding is this, we're seeing a pretty solid vision start to emerge of this whole software-defined infrastructure, more intelligent infrastructure, but realizing it's not going to happen overnight. We can't just flip a switch and there we go. So we're spending a lot of time working with them on what is the transformation, the journey we take there. How do you start to first expose things, extract them and expose it through APIs, then get to the automation and orchestration. So how to dynamically provision capacity to use that. And then over time, get much more intelligence. Can I learn? Can I leverage from analytics and get much more efficient operations? So we're clearly seeing industries do that. Now, one interesting point you made earlier, and from the study, is there seems to be a lot of focus or priority of this environment around operations and operational efficiencies and cost. And seen an interesting shift in our commercial clients over the last, I'd say 12 to 18 months. 2 years ago, when we were having this conversation, it was all about cost and operational efficiency. Seen a much greater emphasis more recently on agility. How do I do the DevOps fast, get very rapid application development? How do I bring value to the business more rapidly? And that's been an interesting transition. Cost and operations is still there, but I'm almost seeing that take kind of the pole position on what's driving this.
That's right, and I love your example about retail, because I know we often think, and I know many government folks are thinking, that's the gold standard of customer service is the retail industry. So, we might not see our CSRs or our government folks with the headsets on helping us, but we might be able to
Secret Service.
Yeah, well, there you go. But we'll get our benefits online, and we'll be able to have coordinated access to information and coordinated benefits. So that's great. So thank you for that. So Jim, do you want to give us a few examples of what's happening at the federal government space, and maybe piggyback on what Larry said? And
sure. Yeah. Thanks, Adelaide. A lot of what Larry talked about with what's going on commercially and outside of the government space. He talked about the concept of a digital business, and I think there's some real parallels here with what we do in the federal space and really what we see as the government, the digital government. With the digital government, what makes that up? We see a strong push toward proliferation of application development, applications to really help the services and get the citizens the services that they require. We've seen the maturity of mobility and the increased use of collaboration tools. And all of this, to Larry's point earlier about what he sees commercially, requires supporting infrastructure that can really maintain the support of this rapid changing digital government that exists today. The intelligent infrastructure vision that Larry mentioned, it really is what I think can create the support that's required for that digital government. If you think about the ability for an infrastructure to monitor itself and to really collect and learn from the data that it sees, the ability for that data to then go forward with predictive capability and the use of analytics to actually drive not only an understanding of existing capacity, but really an ability to understand what's next and to forecast based on demand and the future needs of your customers. When you think about the ability to optimize between not only your private infrastructure environments, but also your steps into the public space, where workloads should go and what belongs where. The ability to self-heal some of the common challenges that we see and common failures within the infrastructure space. And finally, the ability to protect against some of the evolving threats, and not just to create a compliant, secure infrastructure, but really to work toward a level of security that can increase the overall security posture of the entire agency. So, when you think about the digital government, those are some of the tenets of the infrastructure support that are required. Those are the major attributes of the intelligent infrastructure, and we're already starting to see where those are taking shape and where they're having a lot of positive impact within the federal space.
And maybe, Jim, can you talk a little bit, too, because, as you're talking about this and the self-healing networks, we know that many IT executives tell us that their staff today can spend up to 65% of their time today just doing routine maintenance on their servers. So talk a little bit about the impact on the IT staff, as we go towards this intelligent enterprise.
Sure, yeah. It's probably best just to share maybe several examples of where we see this vision coming to life within the federal space and how it's impacting those workforces. I'll share 3 examples of where we see some of this happening within federal. The first is with a customer that we've worked with within the Department of Defense space. It really digs into some of the concepts of learning and predicting based on the use of analytics. Within that customer set, the customer actually had application owners who over time asked for and requested storage resources that once we learned and were able to predict based on what we saw as their future demand, we learned that they would actually be requesting 2.2 petabytes more storage than they'd actually need. So over a 5-year period on that program, there was a savings of over $10 million, made up of both the cost of the storage that wasn't actually required, as well as the cost of the labor to administer that storage. A second example within federal that we've seen really take hold of this vision and bring it some success has to do with a civilian agency where we looked at the concept of optimizing both the use of private infrastructure solutions and public cloud. In that example, we stood up a modularized solution and common services, really started to work on more automated deployment scripting. To do so, we did so to actually promote the applications from one cloud service provider for dev and test. That same program also had another service provider that they leveraged for their production environment. What we saw and what resulted in that example was the less amount of manual intervention that was required really drove 2 things. One, it was the much faster time to market for application build and real mission development, as well as just a lowering of the overall infrastructure cost, a 70% reduction in what it cost before that those automated scripts were put into play. And then finally, another example within the federal space of another civilian agency. This was really more focused on the self-healing concepts and the ability, based on some implementation of auto-scaling from a compute and storage perspective. When that agency experienced some significant surge, they were able to, in fact, provision, compute, and storage, and redirect network traffic based on some routing techniques that have been put in play. And throughout the entire surge, essentially, the agency had zero downtime and 100% availability, and zero incidents, critical incidents logged. So a good example of how self-healing and really setting thresholds ahead of time and allowing your infrastructure to self-correct those can come into play. Right. So a lot of success already in the federal space. There are more examples, but I think that can sort of bring to life some of what we're seeing within federal.
Yes, thank you so much. And I think we're going to come back to you now, Greg. And based upon that, can you talk a little bit more specifically about what's going on in Homeland Security? And I'm also wondering, Larry talked a little bit about how retail and how, towards the Christmas rush, you get the scalability. And it occurs to me like FEMA and some of your agencies, they have spikes in the demand for services as well. So just a little bit, huh?
Yeah. Well, we many people think, of course, retail, Christmas, or the holidays. Well, TSA has that same surge. CBP, Customs and Border Protection, same hump, same reasons. So we resonate with some parts of industry. Obviously, where there's a national disaster, there's another part that we resonate with. As different laws affect us, we have another big surge. So there's always periods of increased activity, sometimes to an extreme. But at DHS, what we're doing is actually embracing the cloud rather drastically, a drastic change from our prior paradigm. We developed an internal private clouds at both our enterprise data centers. This was a big step forward prior to when what we think of as a cloud was even a name on the street. And we have over 1,400 servers in those clouds, saving us quite a bit of money. One program alone saved $14 million just in their implementation. And on our SharePoint implementation, we saved 43%. But net is that we felt that internal cloud was the first step. As industry became more capable of receiving our loads, protecting our data, as FedRAMP got in place, which is actually this process by which you can get an accreditation that might play across multiple organizations if they accept the way the actual controls are in place. We found that we could actually embrace those outside services. So our whole new vision that's been in place for a couple of years now is the enterprise compute strategy. What we're driving toward is actually to go ahead and actually use those cloud services as the primary where it makes sense. And if not, perhaps a backup or an alternative. We have mission requirements, for instance, to hold some data for over 80 years. Well, if you do that in-house, that's an incredibly expensive opportunity for the SAN investors. And those have to be available because of law enforcement. So if you don't have the file, that case can be thrown out. So, you can imagine our use case is rather dramatic. We have relatively low utilization of some of our servers. That's because we have to have disaster recovery. You can't afford to be down if you're FEMA during a hurricane. So what we can do, though, is actually surge out into the cloud. So we intend to actually embrace the cloud. We're going to come out with a cloud broker idea where we're going to actually have multiple vendors provide us cloud services. And we want to compete the vendors across each other to see who would provide the best services for that capability. When it makes sense and it is in keeping with our mission. There'll always be some things we keep within our firewalls, close hold, the president's agenda, those type of things. But there are many things we can put out into the cloud. There's no reason to hide the statistics, for instance, from FEMA. And we already have, for instance, all of our external facing websites, almost all, I should say, in the public cloud. So we're going there, we're going to embrace it, and we're actively doing that. Part of that play, though, is if you have to put in a fiber to that given site, your agility goes down. We need networks that adapt. So when we move loads, the network can also move with it, or else we're paying a incredible amount of money to go to the new site. So part and parcel of embracing this new vision is our networks and our compute and our applications have to be adroit. It can't be locked down. the old paradigm of the fixed data centers just won't work for us for many of our applications.
So you've talked, about many aspects of Homeland Security moving to the cloud, and Larry, I'm wondering if you can provide some examples then from the commercial sector, and maybe since you talked about they've moved from really optimizing and efficiency into more of an operational perspective. Share some of the results as well.
Sure. First, I want to react to the FEMA one. I know when Black Friday is. I don't know when that next hurricane is. So
yeah,
that one seems that's such a challenge that I wouldn't want to face. But anyway, we're actually starting to see quite a few similarities on the commercial side. First of all, one comment: this whole notion of going, the target we see is the hybrid. Mm-hmm. I think our commercial clients, like the government, is starting internally, building their own private clouds, using virtualization or the software-defined data center. And then the initial public forays are very focused on dev, test, some of those workloads. But increasingly looking at, well, how do I start, particularly as the security has gotten gotten a lot better, how do we start to push some of our workloads up there, particularly in seasonalities, peaks, et cetera. So I think we're seeing a lot of similarities there.
But you don't have to you don't have to worry about the president's agenda.
Yeah, we don't have to worry about
the
president's agenda. But you talk to a health provider, and HIPAA seems to be equally
HIPAA,
as
banks.
Yeah, PCI, HIPAA. Every industry's got their regulation. But
Talk to Sony.
Absolutely. So a couple areas that we're seeing a lot of transformation. Network transformation, dear to my heart. So just having a network background. We're seeing, Accenture ourselves, as well as most of our clients, we typically hear about 30 to 40% bandwidth growth each year. So it's going through the roof just with all those technology trends. And what we're finding is there's a whole bunch of new network architectures and technologies that can really drive cost savings, better performance, the flexibility, And I know the end state, around software-defined networks and network virtualization, but there's even incremental steps that we're seeing a lot of people take. So, one example, we worked with a global bank a couple years ago, moved them to a converged voice and data environment. We ended up retiring 30,000 circuits in 18 months, saving them $150 million a year. So, big, low-hanging fruit that you can go after, getting to a much more efficient, scalable, cost-effective environment. One consumer goods company is actually starting to redefine. They were going away from one global, MPLS network, really starting to build their own Ethernet backbones. They're starting to use carrier-neutral facilities or these hotels, and then using regional networks, as a global provider, and they get much better cost efficiencies, in terms of price performance using those regional providers. The other interesting thing about that, as Greg was alluding to earlier, I need the network to adapt, and these carrier hotels are very nice cloud bursting. All the major providers are in there. They, both from a service provider network perspective, but also from a the cloud service providers. So those are becoming the me points. What the NAPs were when you guys were building the internet, which the government drove, to it's the equivalent now in this cloud world. The other area, software-defined data center, we're seeing a lot of activity, and all of our clients in various stages of maturity. And here are the ideas. We spent a lot of time virtualizing compute over the last few years. I can spin up a new virtual machine in a matter of minutes, and then wait 3 to 4 weeks for my network guys to go in there, do the VLANs, the firewalls, the load balancers. So we're saying, that's actually where we're starting to see quite a bit of activity around SDN and network virtualization. Can I start to now provision it more rapidly, help catch up with that? And we've been working with one life sciences company on their SDDC program, and it's interesting. They had the vision, but the real challenge is not just putting that stake in the ground, but how do I actually get there? What is the roadmap? So we spent a lot of time working with them on defining that plan, helping them identify, go through their application portfolio and figure out what workloads and applications can I move over, what's the timing, et cetera, migrating to that. Hitting a lot of emphasis on the new operating model and the governance around this, because you as you pointed out, Adelaide, this is a different environment to operate. As you get into a highly virtualized, software-defined world, there's a whole bunch of new operational challenges. So I may be able to self-provision and very quickly, but when I have to troubleshoot and sectionalize the problem and remediate it, it's hard enough when it's virtualized machines. Add network and storage into that, and it gets really messy and hard. So we're actually spending a lot of time working with ITIL and COVID and rewriting the standards around cloud, et cetera. and this particular client, they were, you can actually do this stuff relatively, quickly. I mean, we were actually able to get a data center up and running in this new software-defined world in about 90 days, which is impressive. And I look at it now, now that they're getting that, the first thing they're starting to look at is how do I get to that, the hybrid cloud. And you're focused on cloud brokering. I mean, Accenture's actually investing heavily on that. We have this Accenture cloud platform that's really intended to broker across the Amazons, the Microsoft Azures of the world, and into the private world where a lot of our clients, like the government, do want to keep some of the data on-prem. So we're seeing that.
Just talk a little bit about that cloud brokering. So what does that do to the consumers, say in the retail or the finance environments? What access to information does that give them?
Yeah, I think it doesn't necessarily. It's just a better way of delivering the stuff more cost effectively. You can, you can, if one of your cloud providers isn't hitting the SLAs and the terms or the cost points, you can move those workloads around. And
I think that's the big incentive is basically money tells, right?
Right.
It's hard to enforce an SLA. However, if I move my load, that vendor is going to pay attention. Mm-hmm. Or if they know I can move that load. When I give them a call and say, hey, by the way, this is not working, here's the data, they'll pay attention, or they'll lose the business.
And our focus, actually, when I look at our hybrid cloud strategy and the assets, I mean, we're focused on how to not just provision that, but then provide enterprise SLAs across that. Because it should be transparent to your customer base, the consumers. It's really a way of delivering it more effectively, more agilely, more efficiently. But you better have the service levels, and we see us playing a big role in kind of providing those end-to-end service levels across this hybrid infrastructure.
Yeah, so thank you. And Jen, I'm going to turn to you now. And Larry talked about in the commercial sector having the vision and actually developing a roadmap. And I know you've given us some excellent use cases in the federal level. Can you talk a little bit about where you see that vision become a reality in federal government agencies?
Yeah, I actually think the future is bright for this vision for intelligent infrastructure that we're talking about. And I think about some of the disruptive technologies of the past and even that we're currently working with. And I think about some of the steps that agencies are taking to build that roadmap. It really makes me think that all of this work to transform is really focused on several core outcomes that we want to get to. Bettering performance, managing cost, increasing the security, and ensuring security. And when I think about the intelligent infrastructure vision, all of that we've talked about today, a lot of those attributes, they really form the basis and the means to actually achieve those kind of outcomes. So these roadmaps and the plans that our customers here in Federal are thinking through, this ability to monitor and learn and predict based on the data you see, the ability to optimize across multiple providers of infrastructure services, the ability to self-heal and even protect against the evolving threat. It's very real, and there's some success already. And I think to get back to those core outcomes that we want to achieve with the road mapping and the planning of bettering performance, managing cost, and securing security and ensuring security, the vision really can take off. So it's got to be a part of the roadmap, and I'm excited to think that the vision can be a big part of that.
That's great. So I might ask you, Greg, too, to piggyback on that about a vision from a Homeland Security perspective and roadmaps there as well.
Well, ECS is our roadmap, which is that enterprise compute strategy. We intend to pull back a little bit from the concept of having our own data centers and use what makes the most sense. We want to enjoy the benefits of the commercial market, and we want to be able to move workloads between various providers based upon what makes the most sense, where they provide the best value, and they're performing according to their agreements. In addition, we want to see what the market forces does to those prices. We want to see it ratchet down. Today, my phone carries more bandwidth than I had in my house 5 years ago. Mm-hmm. I would like to see that type of innovation continuously come into the government. And that's part of what we want from the broker, is we intend for those contract line items to grow and change and evolve as the market evolves, and we can embrace it. So we intend to use it to our advantage and to embrace the commercial marketplace where it makes sense.
Good. Well, and you've got a good partner here
yes.
who can help you understand some of the best best case studies there as well. So, group, we have one last question, and this will be for all of you, and we'll have a discussion about it, and then we'll go to the audience questions. So, the last question that I'm going to ask you is, tell me what the future looks like and some of the next steps to get there. And I think we've talked a little bit about, the roadmap. Maybe talk about some of the strategic investments that you see your agency making, that you see the commercial sector and the federal government's making to actually get there. Who'd like to start?
I won't start with the federal government, but I can talk about where we're betting big.
Okay.
So I talked a little bit about we're betting big on the hybrid cloud and that whole notion of cloud brokering. So that's clearly one. SDN and network virtualization, we actually got out ahead and started to invest there. And that's an interesting one because if you look at it, it's going to take a long time to do that. You look how long it took us to deal with compute virtualization. The network environment is incredibly complex, and if you get it, if you break the network in the process of it, it doesn't matter how good that back-end infrastructure is if you can't get to it. So, Greg's point about the network better be there. We don't want to dinker too much. So what's interesting there is we understand where it's going. We've got a pretty good handle on the vision. So we're trying to figure out, okay, how do we start to get our hands around this? So we're big believers in pilot. Get out early, pilot, and do that. So, pilot, how do I do VXLANs and start, firewall load balancing within that software-defined data center. Take a data center or take a piece of a data center, start to test the waters. How would I roll it out into store environments, start to collapse to, so I don't have 50 different devices in every retail store, which is a big issue for these guys if they've got thousands of stores in their geography. So get it out there, test the waters, pick one store, get very, out there. I think it does multiple things for you. It gets, you start to see how the technology, the benefits, you start to quantify the value it can provide. But or even more importantly, you start to understand what it takes to operate this environment. Because that's my fear is you better be ready to operate some of the complexity there. So there's incredible power as I software define things, as I start to take advantage of this hybrid world. But when things go wrong and I have to sectionalize and troubleshoot multiple moving parts, some external, I better be ready to operate that. So I'm a big believer is get your arms around it and make it real. Don't make the pilot. If you don't care if the thing's down, then you're not going to build the operational capabilities. So pick something that is meaningful, but do it in an incremental way, and then based on that, you can start to evolve and start to build your operating capabilities.
We in DHS are investing heavily in a number of different areas. One of the areas that, of course, is in the mobility. We are seeing that as a means of achieving our mission more effectively at the point of delivery. So whether it's the agents on the border, the TSA agents talking to you, wherever they are, we're seeing mobility becoming a larger factor in all of our decisions and a big player as we go forward. We see things like CDM, which is the continuous diagnostics and monitoring, which is a means by which we understand what's happening in our environment and then respond to it, especially around security. That's going to be huge. So the intelligent, effective use of the interaction with our environment, and then finally big data and the ability to tag data so that I use and have access to the data I need, and the folks that don't need it or shouldn't have it can't, is going to be a big player. And as the network adapts and as our applications adapt and our databases, that's going to be a big player for us. So those are innovations or areas of focus that I see as we go forward. It's going to impact DHS.
Okay. Jim?
Yeah, I think a lot of what both Larry and Greg have talked about with focus areas from a broader Accenture commercial standpoint, even specific to DHS, they really make sense for how we as AFS, Accenture Federal, are looking at the market. A lot of the efforts with some of the hybrid cloud technology that Larry spoke of, with the Accenture Cloud Platform, the ability to work with customers to actually maintain that balance between the public and the private. A lot of investigation into workload management and how to truly manage the ability to go from one provider to the next. We're digging into some of the self-healing technologies that will allow for customers to get involved with setting thresholds and understanding when thresholds are met, what kind of changes in the infrastructure environment will actually happen. So those are some of the areas that we think will pay dividends going forward for some of those government agencies that actually want to transform, in the infrastructure field.
Hitting on the workload or the application, that's an area where actually, even though it's higher up the stack, if you will, I'm an infrastructure person, spending a lot of time there, because if I really look at it, we're working very closely with our industry teams, our application teams, because you really got to understand the workload, the data that's going to get moved into that environment. So you need that knowledge to really do this properly. So we've actually been investing heavily in everything from methodology and tools. So we have one tool nicknamed ACAT, Cloud Application Transitions, part of a suite that really helps you analyze your portfolio, because all of our clients are at different levels of maturity in terms of how much they've overhauled their portfolio. And these are massive application portfolios given the nature of our clients. So analyze that portfolio, determine what needs to be done to do I need to port the application, what I need to do, which ones are targets to move first, and then actually help with the transition over. We've also invested a lot in workflow tools, and if you really look at it, when you start to look at some of these workloads, you may have 150 or 250 steps, and with a lot of dependencies on how we move these things over, just understanding what data, when I need to do this backup, then I can now do this, in order to make sure that it moves over successfully, or potentially even rolls back if there is an issue. So we've been investing a lot in that methodology and the tools, and then even the factories. With a lot of our clients, we can leverage offshore and to do those functions. But it is just building that industrialized engine to enable you to effectively identify, move those workloads, and do it efficiently.
We're seeing also a data-centric universe, where as we go forward, it's much less about the application, more about the data and the meaningful aspects of that data. In addition, we're also seeing it being more open. We want to expose all we should expose to the public. And we expect the public to give us feedback and to help us better understand how we can better provide services. So over time, we're seeing the technologies mature around data-centric view of IT.
That's okay. So we do have a few questions. I'm going to wrap up the group discussion on that and go to some of the questions that we have from the audience. And this one is, you all talked about your vision, and you've given great examples of what to do, what first steps, how to pilot things and look at workloads. But what do you see as inhibitors to this vision of the future, and what can be done to work around all these impediments? And you might want to think about, and you talked a little bit about it, Larry, it's not just the technology, you've got leadership, you've got budgets. Maybe talk a little bit about that as you think about some of the impediments.
I mean, going back to the operations, that's the thing that keeps me up at night, making sure that we're operationally ready, that we're transforming our operating models. The standard ITIL code has to evolve to handle the software-defined world. The ability to orchestrate the remediation, or the sectionalization of remediation, because you got a lot more moving parts. If you're bursting to a hybrid cloud, I got to deal with my, either my carrier-neutral facility or gateway. I've got to deal with the public and my own internal stuff. I've got different technology partners, highly virtualized now across all, compute, storage, network, et cetera, and just trying to pull that all together and orchestrate that. So we, spending a lot of time on that operating model, a lot of time on the tools. Now, good news is we actually have great evolution of the tools. I mean, you look at it, using analytics for operations, was a wake-up call for me. A few years ago, when I was running our comms network practice, I remember the woman who ran that came to me and said, "Hey, we should really talk." They were doing a lot of analytics for service providers around customer churn, et cetera. But she basically said, you took all that network data and how rich it was, and you put it into these engines, would drive incredible insight, including operational capabilities. And I got a wake-up call a few years later, and the ability to start to pull some of that data in. Because these engines can now process unstructured data, if you can take like Fulton performance data, mash it up with trouble, you get operational insights you've never. You can start to move from a reactive and proactive world to one that's much more predictive, and we're seeing that. So trying to take advantage of how do we leverage analytics to operate more efficiently, get more predictive in our operations. Some of the tools to help us sectionalize and troubleshoot. So there's a lot more to come, but I think getting your your operational capabilities defined and tested with pilots. That's why I think the pilots are so important. is you got to feel your way and iterate and keep evolving this. It's going to take a while.
I would add, and I definitely echo those points, that the standards are maturing. So the ability to move a workload sounds easy. It's actually incredibly complex. If I go from a virtualized infrastructure in one provider to another, it's extremely difficult sometimes. And bluntly, there's a lot of data that probably has to move. How do you make that data transition between the two is going to be huge. And as we look through this and the standards mature, it'll become easier. But it's going to be a little bit of a trial and error as we go forward. The early pilots will help us discover that, but it's going to be a learning experience.
And Greg was right about the data. I mean, I look at, there's been a shift. Is the VM the same? Now it's, hey, what about the data? And I think there is. I'm definitely seeing that as well on the commercial side.
Yep. The other thing I would say would be the governance, the ability to manage the change. So now you've got, if you ever heard of the phrase VM sprawl, which basically means that my developer, just use an example of a developer puts out a virtual machine, doesn't like what happened on it, spans up another. Maybe doesn't shut down the old one. Before you know it, that developer may have a farm of 20, 30 servers when, in fact, they only need one. So VM sprawl was a big to-do. And when you think about it, we're going to be virtualizing networks, we're going to be virtualizing machines, we're going to be virtualizing the network, the management layer over it. So we need to have a governance set of tools that can enable this orchestration.
Yeah, and this is one we've actually been looking at a lot, is if you take a look at it, our traditional CMDBs, the remedies, the ServiceNows, we're dealing with much more static environments. But now if I'm spinning up a VM in a hybrid world, some of the infrastructure I own, some I don't, you've got a much more fluid environment, and you have to manage, and you need something to reflect that topology so you can use it to troubleshoot. So we spend a lot of time working with those technology partners and how they evolve their tools to handle the dynamics of this environment. That's as
right.
workloads fly around.
That's right. My VM may be sitting in Oregon one day and in Virginia the next, and my network now changed dramatically, yet I'm still getting that same end result. So troubleshooting becomes a huge issue if you don't have good governance.
Right.
One comment on the sort of the cultural side of this that Greg mentioned. I think the ability, when you think about technology solutions, to in fact have an open mind to become more of an agnostic to go at it from agnostic perspective. I mean, I think we see a lot of our customers actually get locked into certain types of technology solutions. And to Greg's earlier point about the ability to actually move and shift workloads, and that's how you really get the attention of a vendor. Even from the beginning, don't start locked in on your entire solution with one type of product or one vendor solution. Be agnostic. The second thing it makes me think of is really the way that we see requirements actually asked for today, which is many times the customer will come and they'll want a number of VMs, or they'll want a certain amount of storage. And at the end of the day, we really need folks to ask the question from a services perspective. And when you think about infrastructure and the type of services you want, and that's how you ask the question, then you'll be much more prepared to really take that next step into automation and orchestration, really based on some of the attributes of that intelligent infrastructure vision that we've discussed.
Right, and be able to ramp up when you need to.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Okay, another question from the audience. What does increased automation mean from a workforce perspective? Can we repurpose the workforce effectively? So, any additional thoughts on that? Or?
Well, I think, 7 years ago, they introduced the iPhone. And when I first came in to work in the workforce, they had mainframes, and I had no terminal on my desktop. I had a typewriter that my administrative assistant helped with. The world changes, and we have always adapted. That's the power of our workplace. And I think what we're seeing now is an opportunity for the workplace to evolve and then grow and actually get more effective as we go forward. Being static will never happen, and bluntly, it's fun to be in this world right now.
Yeah, and, you're still going to need the workforce. It's just what they're not going to be doing is doing mundane tasks like going and provisioning my VLANs, as I talked about earlier. They're now going to be helping to step up the capabilities and now troubleshoot and design and get out of the maintenance mode. A lot of these guys can't transform because they're so busy stuck on 70% of their time doing maintenance work, troubleshooting, so they're going to be able to get on that and focus on the higher value stuff. So I really don't see it going away. I mean, I think it's just repurposing. And if you really look at the areas, I look at network, particularly network virtualization in new areas. You look at security, we can't get people. We can't, fast enough, right? So I think it's just retooling and moving up the value chain, if you want to call it that, and focusing less on the mundane stuff and more on the higher value stuff.
Right.
Yeah, the workforce is vital. All the steps we've talked about today, the different attributes of where you could go. I mean, when you think about things like analytics and business intelligence, I mean, there's a whole sort of void within that workforce right now for skills like that. So it's even more demand on the workforce in many ways to actually get to those places. Greg talked about the difficulty of actually managing workloads between different environments. There are certain skills that you have to have, certain experience. So if anything, I think the trends we're talking about and some of the advancements that can be made from an infrastructure modernization perspective, they'll only put more emphasis and onus on the workforce to up their game. So maybe a little twist on the question. It's actually not going away. It's even more important.
Yeah, someone's got to write the scripts. I mean, it's not like those automations just do themselves.
Exactly.
Right? Someone's got to go do that. Someone's got to put configure the analytics engines, figure out the data sources. There's a lot of work to be done. The good news is we have good job security going forward.
Well, good job security and also possibly more interesting work than the mundane things before automation. So,
Absolutely.
All right, let's go to the next question then. How do we track the effectiveness of cloud across government? And are there solid metrics involved? And Greg, you talked a lot about some of the initiatives you're doing there. And can you talk a little bit about the metrics that you're using or the effectiveness that you either you see already or what you're expecting as you move into cloud?
Well, we've answered those type of questions for OMB, GAO, the IG. The issue is...
You've got them down pat now, right? Yes.
Well, we have a consistent answer. But the underlying business problem we face is that the accounting systems were never configured on a system-by-system basis. So how does that manifest? Well, right now we're in a building and the power is probably paid as part of the utilities. That comes out of one budget. And I may be getting the security guard out of the second budget. I may be getting the application support out of a third budget, et cetera, on down. So the ability to say this load at this application in this location cost $50 million is extremely a judgmental call based upon accountants. And that's why accountants make good money, because they do those accounting. That's their job in life. Everybody thought it was dull. I studied some accounting in school. It's actually a pretty exciting field. You get to make some judgment calls as long as you can justify it. So when we were actually asked, and rightfully so, give us a business case. You've now moved from this load to here. It's very tough. I was able to give the SharePoint statistic because we had the system before and we had it after. And we actually spent a long time trying to figure out the true advantage of that. The one program had a cost estimate before and a cost estimate after, so we were able to give you that $14 million savings. Overall, it's extremely difficult to get a before and after in the federal government because our costing systems were never set up that way. We may have a $600 million budget for facilities. It may cover, the building, the power, the guards, and, the road maintenance. Apportioning that portion to a given computer that may be on the third floor of a building is very tough. So long story is, it's not an easy answer, and I apologize, GAO, IG, and OMB. It's the truth.
Larry, any perspectives from the commercial sector? Or?
Yeah, we don't have quite that complexity in some respects. But where we see a lot of this where it gets very difficult is a lot of our clients are just massive conglomerates. They might have hundreds of businesses underneath, and we have similar chargeback issues. I mean, we spend a lot of time when we look at these infrastructure programs on how we actually allocate costs. In fact, that Accenture Cloud platform spends a lot of time on cost allocation and making sure to reconcile, particularly when in a hybrid world. So
doesn't that go back to the accounting joke? You'd ask them how much it costs, and they say, "Well, tell me what you want it to cost."
Exactly.
It's all a matter of judgment,
yes.
Right?
Exactly. So I mean, so you see some similarities. I mean, it just slightly different angles on it, but similar challenges.
Yeah, a quick add there. I think it brings up the true value of analytics and metrics and where we're going in this transformation type discussion we're having. Not just in the ability to understand resource utilization and track that, but really as it gets into other elements around cybersecurity and the ability to truly understand some of the deficiencies and the metrics that will prove out the means for change. So, metrics are proven to be a core element of our own vision with the intelligent infrastructure, and I think it'll be with us for a long time to come.
Yeah. All right. It looks like we are going to be out of time. There's a few extra questions, and I think for the audience who didn't get their questions answered, we will get an answer to them. And what I'd like to do is just thank all the panelists for all of your experience and your advice and your expertise. And I think this is a wrap.